Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second week session of day two. We have our last Meet the PI session now, and before we move on to the the third talk session, and we have with us Dr. Christina Kwapich. She's recently joined the University of Central Florida as an assistant professor in the Department of Biology, and by recent I mean few months back. So she's still settling in her new place. So she's also giving the plenary in the next session. So you'll have a broader introduction to her research and her work and in that session. Right now, we will just have a Meet the PI interaction session where we discuss your career and things that people might want to ask in the YouTube chat and some questions we also have in mind about how you've been progressing through research. So I guess I can start off, and I think the first thing that we generally ask is to give us a brief introduction to your research career, like why did you get interested in science, why in ants, etc.
That's a great question. Well, and thank you all again for inviting me to be here today. It's a great honor. I've never been a plenary speaker before, so this is really special for me. And I think I got interested in my area very early on. I think some people come to their research questions later in life, and I was a person that really early had trouble deciding between lizards and ants and what kind of creepy crawly was going to be. But it was really two books that set me on the path towards studying ants. And those books were by Berthold Adler and Ed Wilson. They're called Journey to the Ants and the Ants. And in those books, I mean, which were richly illustrated as well, I got really excited about the idea that ants could talk to each other, that ants had a chemical communication system, and that they had sort of this secret language that we couldn't hear or see, but that they were organizing themselves and communicating with each other. And I desperately wanted to talk to the ants. So, um, growing up, I kind of held on to that interest, and I started as my first job as an employee at the butterfly house at the Missouri Botanical Garden in St. Louis, and so started getting interested in insect husbandry, and then went on to Ohio State University in the entomology department, and had the opportunity to work in a few social insect labs. The lab of Joan Herbers, who works on socially parasitic ants, and then later the laboratory of Susan Jones, who works on termites. And so I knew I wanted to work on social insects, and I was just trying as hard as I could to get my foot in the door in any way possible. Um, I later went on to graduate school with Walter Chinkle at Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida, which is in the southern United States. And it was an incredibly good match. We both really value natural history, organismal biology, and sort of bottom up questions inspired by organisms. And so we had a very productive collaboration as student and mentor. And that led me to a postdoc at Arizona State University in the southwestern United States, actually the Sonoran Desert, with Bert Holdabler, who is, of course, the author of the books that initially got me interested in ants. Um, so that was also a wonderful time. I spent 5 years in southern Arizona as a postdoc. And at the end of it, Bert and I decided to write a book together on Myrmecophiles. And so he invited me to join him really on his own project that was already in progress. And that book came out in 2022. It's called The Guests of Ants. Um, and so we completed that piece while I was in my first position as an assistant professor at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. And now I'm finally back in my favorite habitat among my favorite ants in Florida again, here at the University of Central Florida. So I'm really happy to have my lab down here in this, what I call a subtropical wonderland full of beautiful ants. And I'm excited to be actually recruiting some students for next year. Yeah.
I guess that sort of naturally opens up the question of how you found your position, right? And I think a lot of our audience is mostly early career researchers who are starting to transition maybe to the point where they are starting their postdocs or finishing up and then trying to find where they can go and how. So could you give us some insights into how you approach the job market, like what helped, what didn't help, things like that?
Absolutely. And I'll speak to getting a postdoc position and a faculty position because I think those are two really different things. And for me, getting a postdoc position was simply a serendipitous encounter situation where I met Dr. Holdabler at a conference. He attended my talk. And when he had an opening, he actually reached out to my PI. And so that was a really special situation because I didn't go seeking a postdoc. And in fact, there was nothing for me at the time. I do pure natural history, pure behavior, and I don't do genomics. I don't do anything hardcore mechanistic. So it was really hard for me to find a good match. And I was really grateful that this opportunity was there. So I was incredibly lucky to get the postdoc. And so for any job and later on the faculty jobs, I would say the whole thing came down to the intersection of luck and opportunity, right? So when I began applying for faculty jobs, I was in, I think, my fourth year of my postdoc, and the funding would run out after 5 years. So I knew that I had to really, really start looking and applying. And I think I applied to a total of 34 jobs overall. Most of them I found through the Evo job wiki. If most of you are not yet familiar, it's a sort of crowdsourced website where people post job opportunities for both postdocs and faculty and other positions. And really, I was checking that thing 100 times a day. I mean, it's like an addiction. So I applied broadly to anything that I thought I could possibly fit in. Behavioral ecology, behavior, entomology, behavioral physiology, integrative biology, evolution. I was just a shotgun approach. And, um, that first year I didn't get any bites. I didn't hear from most of the places that I applied. I mean, not even a recognition of application having been received. And that's probably the experience of a lot of people applying for jobs. The next year I knew I really had to get serious. I had to get a job. And so I took a serious look at my application materials and I sort of changed the way that my cover letter was framed. I sort of quantified my products and contributions right at the top so that anyone reading it would have no doubts of what my sort of material contributions to the field had been. I didn't leave it up to interpretation. And that year, I actually got sort of 4 bites and a couple phone interviews. I interviewed in person in New Zealand at the University of Waikato. I didn't get the job. And then shortly after, I interviewed at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. And it was a really wonderful interview experience. And I could tell that I was filling a gap that they needed in the department. They didn't have anyone teaching animal behavior. They didn't have anyone to do entomology or miniology classes at all. It was a more biomedically focused department. And so I saw immediately my role is filling a gap. And I marketed myself that way during my interview. And luckily, I was successful in that regard. Um, I realized after about 2.5, 3 years that I was longing for a job where my field work takes place, which is in the southern United States, and also a job at a major research university, what we call in the United States a Research One university, which has more resources. And so I just did a very targeted application. I only applied one place. I only applied to the University of Central Florida, and I got incredibly lucky to get this job. And I think the reason that I got it is because I expressed so succinctly why I desperately wanted to be back in Florida, back with my aunts and back where my major research program was taking place. There are a lot of entomologists in this department. I'm not filling a particular gap. But I think that it was clear that I really wanted to be here. So I think in any interview, if you get to that stage and you're lucky enough, just convincing them that you want this job more than anything is part of your task as an applicant. And I don't know, maybe you guys have had similar experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I think one important thing that came up here, and I guess maybe in also the previous Meet the PI session with Erika, was about the value of persistence in some sense. There's luck obviously involved, and a lot of it is going to come down to when you're maybe entering the postdoc or the PhD or the job market, and if the positions are available at that point in time and related to being persistent, like you said, applying widely, you never know what applies. I guess, yeah. And let's see, he has a question.
Yeah, thank you. No, I mean, maybe you will not have the answer. I don't know how much you got curious about the European market when you were searching for a job, but how much you could say that at the moment it is, I will not say more easy, but that there is more occasion in United States to apply for position than in Europe.
Would I say that that's the case? Is that what you're asking?
If it's the feeling you had maybe watching the market during the last year?
Yeah, I do think there are just a lot more universities and different types of universities in the United States, so there's going to be more options. But I would say I did see a lot of really attractive positions advertised, especially in Germany, that had to do with animal behavior, social behavior, like things very specific to my field. I didn't apply to those because I was so focused on being near my field sites and in this particular habitat, because that's just part of my own objective as a person. But I think definitely there are many European positions that are perhaps more attractive in what they outline as the topic of interest. Here in the United States, I do think many of the job postings have sort of trendy titles, or are, you know, for a methods-based person, and I'm not a methods-based person, I'm an organism-based person. So it's a difference that I see just slightly between United States and Europe, but it may just be my own bias. So
Sorry, Laura, I'm just going a bit further in my question, and I'll leave the room. And you have, because I just, for the people who are watching us, that are from Europe and who potentially would like to apply in United States, do you have the feeling that maybe in USA, like, there will be more chance to get a position if you are American? Or, because I mean, something that I saw in many applications recently, since I am definitely right now in the process, actually, I saw a lot of application in which it's clearly said that they will advantage people from United States. And also, I think with all the movement of inclusivity, there's a lot of new rules also about favorizing people coming from a minority. So do you have the feeling that for someone coming from Europe, it could be a bit harder maybe to find a position currently in the United States?
well, I know that that's definitely true for Canada. I've heard if you're not a Canadian citizen, I mean, basically, it's extremely difficult. But in the United States, I do think universities fall into two groups: those that are willing and able to afford to sponsor foreign visas for scholars from other countries, and those that are not. And so in the United States, we have sort of a tiered university system. I mean, we have community colleges, which are essentially intermediary between high school and like a 4-year undergraduate program. Then we have primarily undergraduate institutions, which are small liberal art institutions. And oh, my lights have gone out. Excuse me. There we go. To wave my hand. And then we have like tiers of research universities: Research 3, 2, and 1. Research 1 universities are big, well-funded, well-endowed universities that have a lot of resources. Like in biology, they'll have field stations, field vehicles, lots of core facilities. And I do think that those bigger research universities have the funding and desire and ability to attract talent from outside the United States. So I don't think there's any sort of bias towards hiring American citizens in those institutions, just because they are able to pay the money it takes to sponsor like a visa, and then perhaps a green card later for an applicant. And they're hoping to target people, the best in the world, all around the world. I do believe that some of the other tiers of research universities, in some cases, may not have the funds and resources to support like people from other nations in all cases, because of the cost associated with it. But I don't think that there's some sort of bias that's intentional against Europeans or people from other countries. In fact, you see that most faculty here are made up of people from every continent in the world. And so I would say there's not maybe the same sort of exclusion that's happening in perhaps Canada. But that could also be my bias as American. So
No,
I'm not sure.
it's good to have your point of view about it, because of course from outside it's not easy to know.
Yeah, no, I understand. No, I think we like to recruit and attract from across the world the best of the best. Yeah.
And also I can say that from a point of view from the Canada, you're right. Like in Canada, they have to justify why they didn't take a Canadian.
Yeah.
So they have to compare the two people and say, okay, it's the same CV, same publication, same things, but they have to choose a Canadian if it's equal. So it's hard, because most of the time they receive so many CV and things like this. So all the people, they are nearly the same in terms of quality. So they have to choose a Canadian.
Yeah,
So
we don't have an explicit policy like that, except in organizations like the US Department of Agriculture, which also has a research branch, right? And then in some government institutions like museums, like there is a rule about hiring US citizens, yeah, or foreign nationals.
But
So
and at the same time, like I mean, we talk about this, but it's a rule that is understandable somehow, in the sense that like you have a generation that is studying in a country, you would like to keep the people that you are training, and so like I mean, of course it can be annoying, but like at the same time, I understand the rule. Yeah, sorry, Laura, I keep cutting you in your question.
oh, it's an interesting question. I'll just say that when I was a postdoc at ASU, something very fulfilling happened there, which was that there were about 11 postdocs in this small social insect research group with about 9 faculty. And we at one point realized that we had postdocs from Poland, Colombia, Japan, Italy, France, Korea. Like, I mean, it was super diverse and international. And we were all just the best of friends. And in fact, when I think about that group of people, most of them have found faculty positions in the United States. Or positions in industry here. And so just from that small sample size, I would say that most large research universities are committed and interested in recruiting global applicants. So keep trying, keep trying if you want to come to the United States. So yeah.
So we have Laura and David. I guess maybe Laura goes first.
yeah, ask my question finally? So I was wondering, like, do you find it hard as a woman to continue in this I don't know, academic professional activity, because sometimes it can be hard for us, like I know.
No, that's a good question. There have been a lot of recent papers, even in my direct field, myrmecology, about being a woman in science or a mother in science. I'm not a mother, but I feel very lucky because on a personal level, I have not experienced any of the discriminatory or nasty things that I have heard some women experience in our field. And by and large, I think animal behavior of all the biological subdisciplines is in some ways female dominated in terms of numbers. So I think that does give us a little bit of comfort and flexibility that some of the other fields don't. And maybe we can thank Jane Goodall and some of the others for getting us started. But I have always had a mix of male and female mentors, and in fact, 2 very strongly supportive male mentors that are from a completely different generation than me. I mean, my PhD advisor, Walter Chinkel, was in his early 70s when he started advising me, and Bert Holdobler was in his late 70s, I guess maybe early 80s when he started advising me. So despite that difference in generation and in sex, I never felt I was never made to feel less than or unable in any capacity. The expectations for field work, writing, and producing work were in my mind totally equivalent to what they would be for a male trainee. And so I try and keep that in mind when I'm training students. I'm not saying we don't see sex or gender, but I hope that at this day and age, people can just consider someone a scientist instead of a woman scientist or a fill in the blank scientist. And I've been lucky to have been treated that way. So I try and pay that forward. And I do think the one place where maybe some of the intersection of my sex and gender, meet with the work, maybe in the realm of field work, because I'm a field biologist. I spend most of my days in the field, like hours a day, digging big holes, rolling around with ants, having a really good time. And I've always felt safe because I was introduced to my field sites by somebody more senior, and they were kind of bequeathed to me, even though I'm out there alone. Now I think about it, now that I have students, I think about, would I want them to be alone in this forest or in this part of the country? You know, and what can I do as a PI to ensure they're safe, but that they also feel free and not encumbered or inhibited by, you know, their traits that they can't control just because of other people's poor actions, right? So it is something delicate that I've been thinking about more, and that now the National Science Foundation in the United States is requiring us to think about when we write grants, how to protect students of all different sort of diversity axes in field situations. And we have to write a statement about that. So, you know, some parts of the United States are more hostile than others to women or people of color. And it's something as a PI now that I think about that I had the luxury of not thinking about as a trainee. So your question's an interesting one. And I just have to say that I've been incredibly lucky. So, I mean, I don't know.
No,
Yeah.
it's good to hear too. It's good to hear that it can be easy sometimes too. So
Yeah, and I think part of it might be my outward attitude. I mean, people have started to say things to me, and I immediately shut it down. So it's never gotten past the first sentence. If someone has said something I deem inappropriate or having to do with a characteristic of mine that's not a professional one. So I know that not everybody can defend themselves all the time against these power dynamics and awkward situations, and it's never a victim's fault. But I just absolutely find any kind of unprofessional behavior unacceptable, and I just ooze that. So just exude, just be defensive, I guess, is how I approach the field. Yeah.
I think David, Laurie, are you done?
Yeah. I was just wanted to follow up on the mention you made of field work, and particularly how you approach field work, because it's a difficult subject animal with the. I mean, they don't particularly want you around there, and they tend to be doing what they're doing underground and so on. So, I just wondered if you could talk a bit about how you approach field work and the problems you face in the field.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, fieldwork's my favorite thing. Yeah, I work on ants that live below the ground, and sometimes their nests are more than 2 meters deep. Here's a little one back here, a cast of a ant nest of Pagonomyrmex expedius. But you know, there's a lot of work that goes on with ants, and it can be approached in all different kinds of ways depending on the question you're trying to answer. But because my questions are about how the environment shaped social organization and sort of the causes and consequences of a society being organized the way it is, I feel compelled to study that in the field. I really try and ask all of my questions about social interactions and allocation of labor, nest architecture, communities of parasites that live in the colony and what they do. I try and ask those out there. So we've had to come up with some fun and creative methods to answer those questions. And by and large, that's been one of the great pleasures of being a field biologist, is solving these little problems. Like how do you observe something that's invisible and below the ground? And so I guess the old adage, to know something, you know, it applies here, because we dig a lot of holes in this lab, and they always have. So we dig these huge pits next to ant colonies. We can extract them with a vacuum mouth aspirator or a DeWalt vacuum cleaner, and use a little brick trowel to lift centimeter by centimeter of soil out in a pit that's in front of us. So we get every chamber and every ant and myrmecophile and all the contents. Then we can actually census them, manipulate the demography, and in fact, we can manipulate the nest architecture too. I have a little prop over here. We can make ice cubes in these copper trays in the shape of ant nest chambers. And then, in fact, you can bury those blocks of ice below the ground and link them together with a tube. When the ice cubes melt, they form the shape or the space of an ant chamber, and you can actually dump the colony back on top of the ground 2 meters up. and they will reoccupy the nest you've created for them. So you
That's
can
so
create,
nice.
it's so fun, yes. You can create a facsimile nest out of ice, and we do that every time we get a colony, tinker with it, and then put it back, and they gladly reoccupy it. So you can create their own nest for them, or you can create a nest that's upside down or with triangle chambers, anything. And so that's like one of the fun ways we do this. You know, we spy on them and then we put them back. We also put little wire belts, copper telephone wire, 38 gauge wire around the waist of ants in order to permanently mark them in the field. We use fluorescent printer's ink sprayed from perfume sprayers and suspended in ether to mark cohorts of ants, and then build dark rooms out of blackout fabric and hold a UV flashlight to see which ants are coming to the surface from which age class, all in the field, right? So, you know, what else do we do? Like one of the most fun projects I did was a collaboration with Walter Chinkle and some geochronologists and archaeologists who were curious about whether ants might be affecting the way that archaeologists age pottery that's buried in the soil. So in the southeastern coastal plain of Florida, it's just quartz sand. So they use something called optically stimulated luminescence dating to determine how long a piece of sand has been below the surface. And then artifacts that are in that same layer in the sand can be aged based on the electron clock of that piece of sand. And so the archaeologists were wondering, because some of their pieces of pottery were being aged tens of thousands of years, you know, before humans crossed the Bering Strait, whether or not ants might be moving soil around below the surface. And we found that ants were. And the way that we found that out was by making a 2-meter deep layer cake of colored sand and then planting an ant colony on top of it. And then when we excavated the nest that the ant colony built, we could see boluses of mixed colored of sand in different layers in the vertical strata of the nest that had never made it to the surface.
Wow.
And so that told us that ants were mixing soil below the surface.
That's amazing.
Without resetting the clock, right? So I think coming up with those little solutions and ways to ask the ants to show us, you know, their secrets is really like 100% of what's fun about this job.
Yeah.
That and the students. But yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
It certainly does.
We outside.
I
have
think Lola
another
has a
one.
question.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, Abby. Yeah, I have another one. I was wondering, as a young PI, do you find it hard to find grants for your project?
That's a great question. Yeah. So I'm 38 years old. I don't know how young that, I mean, I guess that's still young, but
Still young, yeah.
yeah, I think so. When I started my faculty job at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, I started submitting federal grants, and I think I submitted to, I was really grateful to learn that my second grant was recommended for funding. And it was all about ant crickets, which I'll talk about later today. And it's exactly the topic that I'll talk about. But then unfortunately, when I decided to move to the University of Central Florida, the grant was not able to come with me. So I got really lucky, but then didn't have yet the opportunity to actually engage with a federal grant, and I'm hoping to apply for that grant again. So I guess because I'm at the beginning of my career as a PI, I don't have a ton of advice on that. As a graduate student, I wrote, you know, a little research supplement fellowship called the NSF DDIG, and that was successful. And it really, it was really a boost to my confidence, because I do natural history, behavior, organismal biology. And I think a lot of times what we perceive as being well-funded is methods-based work, very sexy, cutting-edge genomic work. And my focus has always been on the creatures and what are they doing, and what are interesting questions that I find stimulating and I would like to read about or know about. And so I had sort of a crisis of confidence in graduate school, like, what am I ever, is this going to be fundable? And when it was, that really gave me the confidence to keep going on to the postdoc. And since then I've gotten little grants, but yeah, I think at least in the United States, the National Science Foundation is very open to funding basic research that's truly basic research. It is not being done for an application to health or agriculture. It is being done for the sake of the work. And that is a really nice thing about our federal funding system here. Of course, that money is extremely limited and it's extremely competitive. So I hope I get lucky again. Yeah.
I hope for you too.
Thank you.
Sure. I guess maybe we change tracks a bit and talk a little bit about. You mentioned that you're looking for students and stuff, right? So when you started, how do you go about looking for students? Are you looking for people who come in with new ideas or new skills? And I guess added to that is the question of you must have had people apply to you. So is there something that you've seen as a very common mistake that students make when applying, and some other piece of advice that you have?
A great question. And I will say, I wanted to circle around to something else you mentioned before about how important persistence is, because, there's vanishingly few opportunities for undergraduates looking to get into graduate school and then looking to get a postdoc and a faculty job. And sometimes it doesn't always happen in the first year that you apply. And that's likely because the right opportunity is just not open for you yet. You have to think about fit. And at every career stage, when you you're a good fit for a position, then it will work, And so I think I'll just start with a mistake. Like I've been getting a lot of inquiries and applications that are just incredibly broadly written. So saying I'm a student, I studied biology, I worked in a lab looking at mouse chromosomes, and I think my interests are a good fit for your lab and that I would grow a lot from joining your lab. And it's really clear that it's a form letter and the name is just kind of filled in.
Yeah.
And that the students are obviously earnest and eager to go on to graduate school, but they haven't clearly articulated why this lab. Why would you want to spend your life working on ants? I mean, it's crazy, right? Like you have to convince me that you're going to stick with it. Like you're going to be willing to do what is essentially a 6-year PhD, at least in our field. And that after that, you and I can continue to be collaborators in whatever field you do end up going into, whether it's academia, industry, whatever. I'm looking for, like a colleague for life. When I'm looking for a student, I'm looking for somebody that wants to work together, and it can clearly articulate why they're passionate about the study of ant biology, be it they're interested in animal societies like, primate societies and bird social systems, and ants fit into that because it's a neat comparative question, or that they just really like the aesthetics of ants. They think trapjaw ants are beautiful and they just could, stare at their mandibles all day long, right? I want to get some inkling that an applicant is someone that is truly passionate about some aspect of ant biology. And if that's there, then there's a high likelihood that they're going to be internally, so intrinsically motivated to work on their project. A PhD is, as you guys know, not a trivial commitment. And in some ways, you have to be like obsessed with what you're doing. I mean, you have to be motivated to really lay out there with a click counter and count ants for 5 hours a day during the summer, or measure, antennal segments until you come up with some kind of a pattern. You have to be desire to seek those patterns and like desire to be in the field, and that has to be at the very top of your list, the internal motivation to answer questions that are deeply interesting to you. And so I think I'm getting away from your original question, but I guess that what I'm looking for is someone that's highly curious, really interested in discovery, and creative. Grades are less important to me. Grades measure how well you're able to do on a set task after a set amount of time studying it. They don't tell me how creative you are and how good of a scientist you'll be, how good you are at coming up with questions when you see a phenomenon, and what, knowing what's interesting, or how to design an experiment. So I guess creativity and sort of a desire to, fulfill what motivates you are things that I think you can really easily see when you interview a person, when you talk to them. Why do they want to do this? Do they really want to do it? Or do they just want to go to graduate school because they want a PhD, or they want, I don't know. Yeah, I want to know what they want. So I think it's not that hard to see when somebody is a good fit, right? Answer your question.
Yes,
What else?
I think that is
Yeah.
quite a detailed answer. So if
Mhm.
you're mailing Christina for a position, then explain why you want to look at fat giants for hours at a time. Highly specific. Okay. I guess maybe we move on a little bit more. And I think maybe we are also reaching near the end. I think maybe one more thing that I wanted to touch upon was you're starting to set up your lab in your new place, right? So I imagine that's a very stressful time, and there's a lot of things that you have to juggle around. Is there something that you realize in hindsight that you should have done, which you think is something that anyone who's setting up their lab or moving to a new place should keep in mind uh, while doing the process?
Yeah, I think the thing I have the least amount of time for, but that I need to do the most, is to write papers. So at every stage, you will move to the next one with unfinished business, right? You're gonna you're gonna have papers unwritten, data unanalyzed, some maybe field work or lab work that just needs 2 more weeks of work. And when you get to this stage, eventually things start to compound. So, for instance, I still haven't published the last chapter of my PhD dissertation, and I graduated in 2014. Meanwhile, I've done and published new work since then, but things like fall to the wayside. And now I have this queue of like 11 papers that are just waiting to be disseminated, and that I don't have the time right now to get out there. And so someone wise said to me, like, if you're not sharing your scientific work, if you're not disseminating it, publishing it, then it's just playing, right? Because I'm the only one that knows the answers to these questions that I approached and that I so meticulously measured and cared about for so long. And for me, the challenge is always writing up old work. So my advice to anyone before starting a new position, if you have a little break, maybe 3 months or something, you might be thinking about going on an amazing hiking trip. And I'm going to tell you, write those papers instead, because it'll mean a lot more to you in the long run. And right now, that's my biggest challenge. So clearing the decks, because I want to start new stuff, right? But the decks are still full.
I guess yeah, thank you so much for those answers. We'll wrap up this session now. I think we'll have a short rapid fire question answer session if you're okay with it.
Sure.
And okay, so I think we start with maybe something we touched upon in the session. What is your favorite ant species?
Oh no, you got me. Well, I guess I'll say Paganomermex badius. It's the one I did my graduate work on, and they're just a really agreeable ant. Yeah, pictured here.
Nice. I won't ask your favorite field site because you move jobs for it, so I think it should be obvious to people. What is the favorite part of your daily PI routine?
My daily PI routine, working with students, seeing them succeed. I like it even better than ants, and I never thought I would. So that's a great joy. Yeah.
What is your favorite journal for reading papers?
Look Gosh, I read broadly. I would say my society journal, Insect Socio, is a great bastion of knowledge, but I also like behavioral ecology and sociobiology. It's where I published my first author paper. And I find often I'm just Googling papers, and after reading it, I realize it's in that journal. So I think some of these organism or taxon-specific and behavior-specific journals are really at the top of my list. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to hear about behavioral ecology and sociobiology. It's where I also published my first author paper.
It's great. Yeah.
So what I guess yeah, maybe one paper that inspired you recently.
Oh yeah. So I really like the work of a colleague and friend of mine, Nobu Mizumoto. He works on termites, and he recently published a paper in Evolution about the sort of porosity of different termite colonies. So ones that are live above ground and are nomadic, and some in solid pieces of wood or rotting pieces of wood. And then sort of the number and diversity of termitophile beetles that these colonies host. And he sort of opened my eyes to some ideas that I'm now mentally transferring over to myrmecophiles, which is my realm, ant-loving creatures. I thought that was a really clever comparative paper, and he's just really good at those. I'm a great fan of his. He's just starting at Auburn University now. He's looking for students too.
Nice. The most eureka moment that you had?
The most unique what?
The most eureka moment that you had in your research? The moment that you went eureka?
Is it the moment when you decided you had to go and vote in a faculty meeting?
Yeah, well, I may have missed it now, so whatever. No, the eureka moment, I guess my first one came as a PhD student when I was looking at sort of allocation to foraging in harvester ants across the annual cycle, and I was seeing it was about 30%. And then one day it started to change, it started to drop off. I said, oh no, like I need to go out and dig up another nest. And then I kept doing it for another 4 years, and they followed the same pattern every year. Every colony in the forest was allocating almost the exact same percentage of workers to the role of foraging. And I had this like really, it was really creepy to me. It was so amazing that the environment had shaped demography across colonies in this way, such that allocation was identical across colonies of different sizes in the same habitat, and followed this annual pattern. That to me was my spooky eureka moment, and it really got me hooked on Florida harvester ants. So yeah.
I think we had a question on the most fun project, but you mentioned about the project that you did with the archaeologists, so I won't go into that.
That was fun. Yeah.
I think we close with one standard question that we ask all the Meet the PI speakers. One thing that you would prioritize to change in academia?
I would, gosh, there's so many things. Okay, I'm going to avoid the obvious, which would be issues of equity, and jump to something else, which would be less of an emphasis on the quantity and quantification of products and publication. I think H indexes, I-10 indexes, citation counts, I think it's all a plague, and it is doing a disservice to science and scientists to try and increase the number of publications and the impact of publications rather than creating works that are whole stories that tell a story in the amount of time it takes to collect data for a good story, and in the format that makes sense for those important findings. And so I think that our scientific community selects for a type of publication and a type of scholar that can rapidly produce and rapidly brand their science as high impact. And I don't think that that's the way the science should be going. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that frank and realistic
Very
answer
nice
to that
answer.
question. Yeah. So with that, we come to the end of this Meet the PI session. Thank you, Christina, for being here and for answering all the questions that we had. I think, yeah, we'll see you soon for your plenary, I guess in just about 45 minutes or so. So thank you so much once again. And
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a
Thank you a
pleasure.
lot.
Pleasure to meet each of you. Thank you.
See you in 45 minutes.
Bye. See you.
bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks.